Hey everybody, today I'm going to look at the 1980 film Atlantic-City, directed by Louis Malle, which captures a pivotal time in the history of a fascinating place and also carries an important message about self-respect. All right, the setting of this film is Atlantic City, New Jersey, USA, but Atlantic City is much more than the setting of the film. The city itself is almost the fabric of this film. Atlantic City is one of those places that has had major ups and downs in its history, and it's also the kind of place that attracts many different kinds of people, some of whom are on the margins of life. It's not a place most people would pick to settle down and raise a family. It's been a resort town going back into the 19th century, and the beaches and swimming pools there attracted a lot of people who lived in crowded urban areas like New York and Philadelphia, so it was popular with East Coast vacationers and retirees. It had a look and feel very much like Coney Island in New York, with the beach and the boardwalk, except that it was a place where law enforcement was pretty lax. The golden age of Atlantic City was really in the roaring 20s during Prohibition. Drinking and gambling went on pretty much unchecked during that time, so it attracted a lot of tourists, but also a lot of unsavory types. Racketeers, gamblers, con men, prostitutes, etc. Atlantic City went into a period of decline in the 1950s and 60s, partly due to demographic changes in the U.S. Middle-class people were moving out of urban areas and into the suburbs, and places like Atlantic City lost some of their appeal. In an effort to revitalize the city, the state of New Jersey legalized casino gambling there in 1976, which was a couple of years before this film was made, and it is this Atlantic City that is the setting for this film. This is before the Atlantic City of the 1980s and 90s that we associate with Donald Trump. The modern glitzy hotels, the casinos, the title fights in boxing, etc., before it became like an East Coast Las Vegas. I was in Atlantic City once in my life, and this was about 2016, and back then, it was in the middle of another period of decline, which I assume has continued since then. The place had a definite seediness to it that was very apparent anytime you moved outside of the touristy areas. Okay, so the Atlantic City that we see in this film is a place that has definitely gone downhill, and to make it even more depressing, it seems to be in winter. So not only is the setting in a place that's past its prime, but it's cold, the sky is gray, and full of older people who are also past their primes. However, there's something else going on in this town. Huge old hotels and buildings are being demolished with dynamite and wrecking balls to make room for the modern new gaudy casinos and hotels, which will signal a kind of rebirth in this town. The film has several well-developed characters with intertwining relationships, but the main character and protagonist in Atlantic City is a man named Lou, played by Burt Lancaster. Our first glimpse of Lou is of an old guy in a small, dingy apartment, smoking a cigarette and ironing his tie. Lou is a small-time number runner, so he's a guy who walks around the neighborhood and people place small bets with him, and he gives them a slip or a receipt so that they can claim their winnings if they happen to win. And it appears that Lou has or had mob connections. He used to work with some of the old school mobsters back in Las Vegas, at least that's what he claims, but he's kind of vague on the details. In any case, the most striking thing about Lou is the pride that he takes in his appearance. He's probably in his late 60s, and he has a dignified bearing about him. Sort of like if you've seen the film The French Connection, the character of the criminal mastermind Charnier, or as Popeye called him, Frog One, played by Fernando Rey. He carries himself with a similar kind of old-world elegance. But this is in stark contrast to the actual day-to-day life that Lou lives. He has a shabby apartment in a rundown building, and he seems to be a kind of kept man for this older, bedridden, hypochondriac lady named Grace, played by British actress Kate Reid, who lives in the apartment below and who berates him constantly for his incompetence. Lou endures all of this stoically, but we can imagine that this is not the life that Lou wanted for himself. He never complains, but he is quite wistful about the past. He talks about how great things were back when gambling was illegal and when everything in Atlantic City was bigger and more important, and therefore when he was a more important figure, if not in reality, then at least in his mind. Lou and Grace seem to represent the old Atlantic City. They are old and gray, and like the Atlantic City of old, they're part of a time and place that really no longer exists, except in the memories of people old enough to remember. Lou is a complex character in that though he is taking advantage of the other people in his life for his own benefit, like pretty much everyone else in this film, beneath the mafia tough guy image that Lou tries to cultivate, he's a kind-hearted man who yearns for the respect that has been denied him in his life. Lou sees himself as a protector of women. That's part of his identity as a man. And as the film progresses, we start to learn that Lou's self-image is starkly disconnected with reality. And we realize that although he never admits it to anyone, not even to himself, Lou knows deep down that he is not the man that he claims to be. And this is why he lives the way he does and why he tolerates Grace's abuse. So early in the film, Lou meets one of his neighbors, the young and beautiful Sally, who is played by Susan Sarandon. And meeting Sally, let's say, puts some lead back in Lou's pencil and eventually forces him to face the demons that have haunted him for decades. The story of Lou is what happens to a man when he doesn't live up to his own standards, when he loses self-respect, and the corrosive effect that that has on everything in his life, including the women in his life, and also the way that self-respect can be regained by decisive action. The ultimate message of Atlantic City is that self-respect just may be the most important thing in a man's life. The film Atlantic City has an interesting origin story. Director Louis Malle did make many American films, but this film is technically a French-Canadian co-production. This project actually started out as a Canadian tax shelter. There was a loophole in Canadian tax law at the time that allowed certain investors to avoid punitive levels of taxation by investing in films. So a group of investors had some money and an idea for a film, so they approached Louis Malle about this, and Malle teamed up with screenwriter John Guare to make this film. Louis Malle is one of those directors who is difficult to pigeonhole. He is French, and he started his career at the time of the French New Wave of the late 1950s, but he wasn't really associated with that or any other film movement in particular. Some of the French critics at the time thought of Louis Malle as kind of an upper crusty bourgeois type who made nostalgic films set in the past, and his films often didn't meet with their approval. He made films in France until the mid-1970s when he moved to the United States and began making films there. Louis Malle was actually dating Susan Sarandon at the time that Atlantic City was being made, but of course I'm not at all implying that that affected his decision to cast her in this role. So that's it for Atlantic City. You need to track this film down. It's very watchable, it's got a great message, and it's also a great visual record of an interesting time in the history of Atlantic City, New Jersey. Let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you for watching. I'm Rod Richards. See you next time.